we're going to be discussing Bitcoin as legal tender and more. So let's dive into today's episode.
The world is beginning to witness unprecedented technological growth in areas such as AI and quantum computers. But what does this mean for Bitcoin and blockchain? Welcome to the QRL Live, where we discuss the collision of quantum computing, blockchain, AI, and cryptocurrency, some of the most compelling and emergent technologies today. The field of quantum computers is one of the newest and most promising areas of science, and its implications could very well disrupt our world in unpredictable ways. State-of-the-art machines are being built today that, in the future, could be as disruptive as the transistor, television, possibly even the internet. We can no longer ignore these implications. What does this mean for Bitcoin and crypto? Cryptocurrency, and therefore blockchain, is considered classically secure from modern supercomputers. However, there is a potential vulnerability in nearly all blockchain projects, in that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer running Shor's algorithm could effectively take over the addressing scheme, empty wallets, disrupt applications, and cripple entire cryptographic networks. Scientists, developers, and researchers have known about this emerging threat for some time now, and in response, the NIST has been working since 2016 to develop post-quantum secure cryptography. In fact, the brightest minds in science and cryptography are working on solutions to this problem right now. The QRL project is a purpose-built, quantum computer-resistant, doubly audited, industrial-quality cryptocurrency that uses an NIST-recommended XMSS hash-based signature scheme, which is provably quantum-resistant. So what does this even mean? It means that we develop the blockchain technology of tomorrow in order to keep your digital assets secure today. Welcome to QRL Live. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Resistant Ledger channel, the place where you come for the crypto and stay for the quantum. Welcome to this QRL News Roundtable episode. We have an exciting topic that's been kind of going on all summer, and that is this idea of countries adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. So this core conversation is going to be based around El Salvador a bit, with them spearheading and being the first sovereign nation to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. But within that conversation, we're also going to be discussing other countries that may or may not also do the same kind of thing moving forward in the future, some pros, cons of that, looking at all sorts of topics related to that core of this conversation. And with me for this discussion is our Director of Outreach at the QRL, my co-host, Michael Strike. Michael, it's good to have you with me as always. Fun discussion.
Hello. Let's have some monetary history fun. We'll talk about some third world countries, talk about Bitcoin. Is this the beginning of something more to come, something to be adopted, more so in the future? Or is this just a hiccup on a downtrend? Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out.
Perfect. Well, where I think a good starting point for this would be the meat and potatoes of this conversation is going to be on the part about El Salvador getting into Bitcoin. But before we go into that, I want to provide a little bit of brief context just on the history of money within El Salvador. And also it's kind of related to the countries surrounding that area, because I think that this provides some important information for why countries like this might be well positioned versus other countries, let's say the US, say Canada, or Western Europe. So if you could, to start out for the first question for today's News Roundtable, can you give us a brief history of money in El Salvador from long ago to present day? So from the time of the Mayan civilizations using cocoa beans up until them adopting USD in 2001. Walk us through that, and then we can move into the next questions.
Let's do this. Let me share my screen here for a second. Let me know when you can see it.
Yep, we can see your screen now. Quantum Resistant Ledger.
It's our wonderful web page. We can do a little bit better. This is the central bank of El Salvador, and they actually put together some monetary history here, which I thought was really interesting. You can see the link up here. So essentially, they've gone from cocoa beans to Bitcoin. I mean, that's a little bit of progress right there, right? So, let's see. Even though bartering was what was probably the first method of exchanging value, right? To trade something. The use of cocoa beans exchange value dates all the way back to the Mayan civilization, which I think you alluded to. Cocoa was considered to be the drink of the gods, if I remember correctly, in the Mayan civilization. But after that, the first coins started to be minted in Spain, and their monetary history doesn't look that different than that of most other countries. There's a lot of commonalities. I didn't get down here all the way to see if there was some Roman coin clipping or anything else going on, but essentially, we're talking about a smaller country. They've gone from cocoa beans to Bitcoin, and that's where we're at today. If you want to see the history up here, here's a link right there. But to answer your question in a little more detail. Nayib Bukele, who's the president of El Salvador, I think here's what I think is happening. I think he's taking some plays from large social media companies and doing some of the same things that they've been doing. He's been using even some of the United States ex-presidents have been doing the same thing. They've been taking to social media, but I would say right now the social media is definitely more of the exception than it is the rule. So not only is this new generation of coming in, looking at things as older generations are retiring, but a lot of things like very old solidified mantras, such as don't fight the Fed, right? These are things that for the first time in history are really starting to be challenged and questioned. It wasn't until recently that there was technology that could actually, I'm going to just say, present a possible substitute. All right.
Yeah.
Without making it too political. So part of this has to do with the unprecedented levels of national debt. United States, for example, what are we, 23 trillion, 24 trillion? I remember 10 years ago when it was less than 10 trillion, and the reserve needed to extend what they called extraordinary measures in order to be able to continue to pay the debts. And this has been a reoccurring conversation that's been going on and on and on and on. And I don't think a lot of people are really paying attention to it. But there has to be a bottom at some point. So,
and to add to that, even with the part of, say, a country like El Salvador or others that use USD, one of the frustrations obviously is the fact that they're watching this dollar value getting diluted and even benefiting from it in a time where the printing machine just keeps going and going. And so I think it's a combination of that. We can dive into this in a couple questions about how he is leveraging using Twitter, social media, things of that nature. But I think that one part that he is doing is he is seeing that, hey, you know what? We need a way to be able to bring investment talent here. And I think he thinks that this is a smart way for him to do it. If you listen to interviews with President Bukele, he has a ton of conviction in the system of Bitcoin itself. If you look at El Salvador's history, and not to get too political, but if you look at their past presidents, I think 3 out of the last 4 presidents went to jail for things tied to fraud and other things. And so when he talks, I think one of them,
sounds like a success story.
Yeah, but anyhow, one of them, I think, I don't know, one of them was exiled, one of them, passed away or something, or was on house arrest or something. But they have a bad history of presidents doing fraudulent things with money. So when he talks about Bitcoin, he's like, obviously the whole, don't trust, verify. But we can get into that whole ethos a little bit later in the conversation. But I just wanted to add that one point about why El Salvador is thinking about this in terms of, with their history of money. Because when they moved to USD in 2001, their hope was that they were going to be able to prosper, more investment would come in, and now we're 20 years later than that. And I think that they're thinking the same type of thing with Bitcoin of, hey, could they be the first one to help spearhead this? And they're such a small economy compared to most of the world. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I'd like to move into the second question, because I think you were starting to move into that. And that is, what led up to El Salvador moving in this direction this year with Bitcoin? And how did this kind of all unfold from them even getting to the point where they put this into law in making Bitcoin and adopting it as legal tender.
So as you've alluded to and said quite nicely, I think Naib is potentially, history will tell, but potentially almost a new class of politicians, right?
Yep.
If you do go online, and don't trust everything, obviously, but if you really try to get to the root, there are reports of citizens burning Bitcoin machines and things, and things like that. But if one burns, I mean, you're going to see that photo because that's going to make headlines. And then
the extremes expand on social. If you look at the platform,
yeah.
Yep.
So, like I said, he's taking a lot of. I think he's a generation. What is he? Generation Xer?
Yeah, he's born in 1980, 81. He's 40 years old, I think, and he's
younger than me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before you dive into this, one important note I wanted to make on him as well, just politically, just one is that he is the second president that has won on a party that is not one of the two main political parties. So they're called Nuevas Ideas. So I think he's the first president since the 80s, since I think the president was Duarte then. And so he's the first president that ran on under a different party as opposed to their two main ones. So like he's definitely about new ideas, a populist party that is quote unquote for the people. I know there's obviously a lot of cons and people have a lot of negative things to say about certain things he does, but we're not getting into any of that political stuff today. We're more just talking about the Bitcoin aspect of the conversation. But keep going with what led up to today.
If I'm not mistaken, he's also the youngest president in the history of the country. Yeah. So not only do you have a smaller nation that has a perceived history of corruption and scandal, right?
Yep.
You've got this kind of new blood coming in at the same time as new technology. So this was bound to happen. I asked 6 months ago. I think I tweeted Dan Held and I say, hey, who do you think is going to be? Which is the first country do you think is going to start to add crypto to their balance sheet? And he said, watch my show and you'll find out. Well, I didn't make it to the show, so I wasn't sure what his answer was. So let's talk a little bit how it went down. So El Salvador has this thing it's an app. You can get it on Apple. I think it's on Google. It has to be on Google too. Called Chivo Wallet, right?
Yeah.
So Chivo, I'm not sure exact translation. It sounds, from what it sounds like, it means like excellent or great or cool, something like that. It seems to be more of a slang word. I know a little bit of Spanish, but I hadn't heard that one before. Fantastic, nice. Basically, it's a positive word in slang. And interesting. I mean, think about this: the official Bitcoin now being an official currency. You go to a wallet. It's got a slang name, right? I mean, this is, this is stepping in a little bit in the sides of realism and not as IBM 80s black, collars. I mean, more like the Mark Zuckerberg in a hoodie. Do you know what I mean?
And there's a brand. Yeah, there's a branding element to it. Yeah.
So you download the app, the Chivo wallet. I actually tried to create an account. I am not a citizen of El Salvador, which I found out quite quickly. So what you do is you download the wallet, you type in your phone number, you provide proof of citizenship, and it will generate a wallet for you, and you can populate that wallet, presumably. I didn't make it that far. So with that being said, what's kind of next in this timeline? And what is it? It's September 23rd, 2021. I'm going to take a stab at the opinion that I think Paraguay is going to be next on this long list of countries starting to adopt crypto.
Yeah. We'll dive into that in one or two questions, because I think there's another one where I want to kind of expand into reasons why countries may or may not adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. One part I want to get your take on it, and then I kind of want to give mine is, what do you foresee happening with this taking place? So what are some of the pros, and then what are some of the potential cons that you see with them being the first sovereign nation to embrace Bitcoin? Because there's a lot of whether this happened in 2021. So when this happens, even though it happened today and they have a lot of excitement around things happening quick, if you think about how things transition and change, this is not going to be a quick snap and everything has changed and El Salvador is 100% Bitcoin. There's going to be a slow transition in different aspects where it fits. What I'd like to get your take on is, and then I'll give you mine after I listen and see what your thoughts are on this. Give me some positive outlooks for this and then some negatives, and then I'll give you my take, because I think there's some really interesting ones on the positive side, and then obviously there's some negatives. But what are your pros and cons with how this moves forward, not only for the next 6 months, but 6 years and beyond?
So it's not 100% clear that Satoshi intended Bitcoin to end up as a world reserve currency. In fact, I think that's one of the same reasons he kept the politics out of it, was the same reason as the anonymity.
Separation of money and state. Yeah.
Yes, that. But also, let's say I'll just use. Let's just say that he was not anonymous. Everything that surrounded Bitcoin would be anyone that was a contrarian to the technology would focus on the person. Anyone that was pro-tech would focus on the technology, right? And it would add a lot more potential negative variability. So it's not clear that he intended it to end up as a world reserve currency. I think he said that it'd try it and let's see if it catches on. But it does certainly fall in line with the cypherpunk values of the 80s and 90s. And they believe that encryption, anonymity, and cryptography, cryptocurrencies could change the world. So earlier this year, earlier this year when El Salvador made these announcements, I think in a lot of ways they're actually doing the world a favor in that they're running one of the biggest monetary experiments since the end of the Bretton Woods system. So I think what we're witnessing here is crypto moving from the microscopic, be it a person in relative, you could actually even consider some institutions to be microscopic, to the macroscopic, which is entire nations. So as far as pros and cons, I think that most of these are pros. It should be a wake-up call for sovereign nations. And make no mistake, they are paying attention. This is a monetary experiment. It has to be considered an experiment until it's actually been shown to be successful or unsuccessful, which is why it has a fair launch, because you can choose to either be in or out, right? So the biggest and one of the interesting parts is crypto has expedited this concept of central bank digital currencies, right? In which case, the digital dollar, and China's already running I believe they're already running their version of a CBDC. Yep. So CBDCs, right? Bitcoin, CBDCs, and Bitcoin, both digital, right? But if you have not seen the other episodes, that's where their similarities start, and that's where they end. So I definitely, if you haven't taken a look at the CBDC episode we did, I definitely have you take a look at that, because it's important. Having an understanding of what those are will help you differentiate the misinformation on the internet. For example, if you read a title that says Bitcoin's digital, CBDCs are digital, why do we need Bitcoin? Well, it's the one qualifier that they have in common. CBDCs will give you real-time transactions interfacing directly with the central bank, and with no citizen transparency into what's going on, but the central bank would have complete transparency. Now, Bitcoin provides immutability and complete transparency for anyone. So what's interesting here is when nations start to adopt Bitcoin, does that mean that their balance sheets are going to be visible on the blockchain? I mean, the addresses are visible, but things can be shuffled around and moved around quite a bit through. There's like Bitcoin shufflers, that some people do. Is this gonna bring up one of the advantages? Could this be the start of actual transparency into balance sheets? I'll give you an example. Fort Knox hasn't been audited in decades. Congress was there, 60s, 70s, something, I forget. Okay, there's gold. I see a lot of gold. That's a relief. Well, there's also this thing called fractional reserve gold lending, right? And there's also the United States holds gold for other nations as safety. Ironically, I mean, I don't fully understand how exporting your gold is safe, but Germany several years ago started taking tons and tons and tons of gold back. I think they've got all of it back now, but I mean, the amount of transparency, depending on how this ends up, could be unprecedented as far as monetary policy and sovereign governments.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. I think mine are kind of based around. I have a lot of my positives. There's a couple main ones or pros of how it could kind of play out. What I think would be the first one of those being, I think it's for a country their size. I think it's kind of it fits for certain nations, especially as kind of like the guinea pig of this experiment of seeing how it works. There's certain variables that for countries such as El Salvador or other countries within that region that it makes a ton of sense. So a lot of people, for those of you watching this right now, if you either live in Western Europe, you live in a first world country, maybe you live in North America, if you think about unbanked percentages of the population, in the US right now, the population of unbanked citizens, meaning you are unbanked, you don't have access to banks, you don't have access to same credit card, lending, things of that nature. In the US, it's around 5-6%. In the rest of Western Europe, it's somewhere in the single digits. In Scandinavia, it's essentially zero. But in countries such as El Salvador, the percentage of unbanked people is 70%. So that means that there is not inclusion for 70% of their population. So they're transacting in a very different manner, and it's just a completely different economy. So one part I want to actually bring up, I'm not going to bore you with the details of going through all the articles of the El Salvador's legal tender bill, but I do want to bring up a couple articles within the bill because I think it's really important to mention on them. So the first one I'm going to bring up is Article 7 here. So I'm going to read it out and then provide brief context. So in this, the Bitcoin bill, it says every economic agent must accept Bitcoin as payment when offered to him or her by whoever acquires goods or services. So let's say you or I, we are in El Salvador, we're visiting, we walk into a store, we walk into a shop front, to a merchant, to a restaurant, and we want to pay with Bitcoin. This places the onus on the restaurant, the merchant, to have to be able to accept Bitcoin because they shouldn't be able to exclude us because they don't want to accept Bitcoin. So that's the first one. That's Article 7. That has to be paired, and President Bukele has been pretty specific on this. It has to be paired with Articles 8 and 12, which are number 8 is it's on the business end of it. So what this one says is that without prejudice, if you are a business and we're telling you, hey, you have to accept Bitcoin as payment. If you want, as soon as you accept that money as payment in Bitcoin, you can move it right away with the Lightning Network to fiat, to USD, and you have the ability to do that right away, smooth sailing. And if there's any fluctuation or the price volatility drops, the El Salvador will help cover it. So you're getting the same, $5 that goes in, same $5 coming out on your end. So people can't exclude people from the system. And then the third one is Article 12. And this one helps cover anyone that doesn't have access to a phone or any means of being able to participate in that. This just kind of covers everyone. So I just wanted to bring these up really quickly because I think it's important to talk about one of the positives with this whole concept and early experiment with El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as legal tender is I think the first positive or pro is the inclusion aspect. With so many people that don't have access there, if you look at remittance payments, I think remittance payments last year were like 4 or 5 billion in all of El Salvador. To give you context for how much that is compared to their economy, I think 18 to 19 billion is El Salvador's total GDP. And so many remittance payments is, and for a couple of you that probably are watching this, you know what remittance payments are, but for maybe one or two of you that don't, remittances are just, let's say you have family members that are in US or you're sending money back to El Salvador. There are predatory interest rates and fees that are associated with, Western Union, with all of these money transfer services. So when people make $5 and they want to send something home, they're taking huge cuts out of it. Bitcoin can help solve this problem and just make an easier flow to and from for these countries. So that's my first one, openness. My second pro and a reason I think this could work out well from them is from a talent perspective. So you're already seeing guys like Jack Mallers with Lightning Network. They have not our Strike, but they call it their Strike is their system. You're seeing tons of other people, whether it's their Bitcoin Beach, other people that are big talent pool that are all focused on El Salvador and saying we're after this mission. We have a lot of conviction. So I think there's a lot of potential for talent to be drawn to El Salvador based on what they're after here. So that's a second one. And then a third one is just the investment aspect of people maybe wanting to invest their time, their resources, funding into El Salvador moving forward because they believe in the mission that they're after. So those are some of the pros. There are obviously cons. They're going to, anytime there's volatility with Bitcoin, when there's prices are going to go down, there's ebbs and flows, it makes a super easy news story. If let's say a year from now, when the price drops 40% or 30% in a day or in a week, it makes for a perfect news story to say, hey, told you so, didn't work. But if you look back at history, there's countless examples of everyone saying Bitcoin's over, Bitcoin's died. And the reality is that, yes, it goes
Bitcoin
on.
has died hundreds of times.
Yeah.
So when in doubt, zoom out.
Yeah. So that's kind of, some of my pros and cons, and we will see. We're giving kind of our take on it. What I want to do now, you briefly touched on this with Paraguay, Michael. I want to briefly touch on what other countries do you potentially see going in the same direction of either making Bitcoin legal tender, adopting it. On your radar, just an opinion, what couple countries do you see in mind potentially doing this? I know you mentioned Paraguay. Is there any other ones? Or also the flip side, is there any countries that you see doing the opposite of this or maybe masking it in some way? What do you think?
How crypto is going to be handled is going to be dependent on each country's unique position within the global ecosystem, right?
Yep.
Obviously, the United States, as the world reserve currency, post Bretton Woods, no longer being tied to gold. Yes, people, the dollar did used to be tied to gold. It's not anymore. Has a much different role in geopolitics than someone like Paraguay. So each approach is going to be in that nation's best interests. Who I think is going to be next? I mentioned Paraguay, and they're making news right now. They have a politician. He's a senator in Paraguay. I forgot his name because my brain is full today. But he's saying that if you elect me president, I will make Bitcoin legal tender. When have we heard this? How fast is this moving?
The comical aspect. Yeah, the comical aspect of that is just too of like, is that all you're running on? And but obviously there's much more. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Something that bold, you're placing your if you're in Congress and you're saying if you elect me, that I'll make Bitcoin legal. You're the Bitcoin guy. I mean, that's either a career beginner or a career suicide.
Hey, you live or die by the sword. Yeah,
he will be living or dying by the sword, likely on that. I wish him the best. I think that taking on Bitcoin as a national currency for all of these unbanked nations, this is a lot of value, people. Do you know what it's like to be unbanked? I do not, but I have tried to think about what it would be like to be unbanked, and it's just it's a little difficult in America to wrap your head around, right?
And it's so difficult for the majority of us to have we take it for granted the ability that we're able to all participate in this conversation right now. And most of us probably watching this, we can get, a new credit card it's like Pez dispensers. You get them sent in the mail to you. It's a very easy process. It's something that we obviously shouldn't take for granted because if you look on a global level, this is not the case for most people. And especially in countries such as El Salvador, Paraguay, Argentina, these people have seen history tell them over time they've had their money taken from under them and they've had to, store money under their mattress. Has it just get eroded over time? We've talked about this in past episodes, but it will be interesting to see. I think it especially makes sense for the first few countries to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender or do things similar to this in, this bold of a move. I definitely think it aligns for countries that are in a similar economic situation. So many people unbanked. It makes sense for those type of countries. So countries like Paraguay, Peru, Costa Rica, I don't know, maybe a Morocco. That's a little different, but they still have their percentage of unbanked is still extremely huge. And then it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But
let me ask you this question, Ryan. Let me ask you this question. So for those that are banked, right?
Yeah.
Banking is a very familiar day-to-day scripted process. That's muscle memoried out, right?
Yep.
You get your paycheck, you go to work 45 hours, your paycheck shows up through an ACH, at least in the States.
Yep.
Bitcoin essentially allows you to become your own bank. Now, I've talked to some friends and acquaintances of mine, and I've tried to explain to them the concept of being unbanked. And I'm not really sure that they get it, despite how I try to explain what being your own bank means. Because for our entire lives, we have been part of the system. So that brings an interesting question for those that are paying attention in the unbanked sector. You could already consider them being their own bank, right? If they're unbanked, what's the difference between unbanked and unbanked?
Yeah, what they're seeing.
They already think like this.
Yes, and they have that mindset, and then they're thinking, you know what, this is actually something that is evening the playing field for everyone. And let's go back. It's 2021. Let's go back 10, 11 years at the beginning of Bitcoin. It was an even playing field at that point. Anybody at that time, you could, pull out your laptop, you could pull out a computer, you could mine Bitcoin at that point. Can you do it now on a laptop? No, but early on, there was inclusion there. It's very different. It's kind of a stretch of an analogy, but when it comes to today, what are these people's other options? So I think it's really important that when we talk about unbanked, really trying to see it from their perspective to see. And one other thing, I'm just going to jump back to my pros and cons because I think there's one other important part that I want to mention, which is adoption. It's going to take time for countries such as El Salvador, other countries that adopt Bitcoin over time. There's a learning curve. And when I say it's a con, I don't necessarily mean it's a terrible thing. I just mean it's a part of the process. So what I'm saying is when people get in El Salvador, get used to using the colon, then the US dollar, and eventually US dollar and Bitcoin, there's a learning curve. So a lot of people there are like, I don't know, what do I do? I go to a store and I pull out my phone. What's a wallet? Is it like a physical wallet? What is it? Like,
where's my money? Is it floating around in the ether? I don't know. And learning curve. Yeah.
And with that, but think about this. So if they're thinking it's weird of going from paper money to crypto, think about back in time. If you go back in history, when you move from coins, let's go back a few hundred years. We are in England, and you and I are transacting with coins. And you come to me one day and you say, "Hey Ryan, we have this new paper currency that is we're gonna replace these, and they're gonna take place of this." I would look at you with foreign Google eyes and I'd be like, "Well, what do you mean? Like these coins are that?" History repeats itself. In different ways. So
I'd like to add one other thought before we move on to the next.
Yep, go for it. We'll wrap it up.
Question.
Then. Yeah.
So we've all heard of the Great Flippening, right? I'm going to offer another example of potentially the Great Flippening. You have the unbanked, which conceptually can visualize how Bitcoin works. Not technically necessarily, but as far as being self-banked, they can visualize that because they're already like that, right? So what happens when the unbanked start to when the unbanked countries start flipping over to Bitcoin and adopt faster because they understand the concept because they're already self-banking. I mean, it's entirely possible that balance sheets of the countries. I mean, what if we start ending up like an iceberg tipping upside down? Do you know what I mean? As far as value that's being held by the residents of the country. Because the difference is this. The difference is, for example, El Salvador does not have their own currency. They don't have their own fiat, which means that they use the U.S. dollar. So when they're using the U.S. dollar, all of their trade and their exchange is based on monetary policy on the other side of the world under politics that they have no input in. Taxation, representation, kind of a similar thing, right? And that's the position that's how they live. So I mean, how can Bitcoin not be good? What I see it as, I just feels to me like the technical learning curve is probably one of the biggest is probably one of the biggest cons. I don't want to say con because that sounds like a scam, right? But
Yeah, no, I know what
the
you're saying.
biggest pros and cons.
Yeah, they ran
This is one of the biggest
a number of poll. Yeah, they ran a number of polls there, and I think it was like, some would say, hey, 40% of people were like skeptical about wanting to use it. Some was like 60, 70%. But it's like when you run polls, it's like a political poll. Like it tells you a little bit of something, gives you a little taste of it, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. And of course, in the beginning, there's going to be skepticism
because they are not in charge of their money as it is today.
Yeah. I think kind
Big
of
deal.
moving from this point. I know we've been talking about from the countries adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, and this having a lot of implications overall for economies on a global level and on an individual level for various nations. And what I want to ask is, we're talking this. Most of this conversation has been focused a lot on Bitcoin, but what I want to ask is, as nations add to their balance sheet and adopt Bitcoin and eventually other altcoins in different manners, depending on what the specific use cases are, ways that it would align and fit in with what they're after, because each country isn't going to want to do the same thing. There might be, other countries are going to eventually, you already mentioned central bank digital currency in China. They're doing their thing. There's going to be other countries that are going to say, hey, we're just like Bitcoin, and they're going to mask their idea of a central bank digital currency in the same, they're going to give all the perks, but it's not necessarily the same thing, under the surface. What I want to ask you is, as nations add Bitcoin, altcoins to their balance sheet, could QRL act as a nation's quantum insurance policy? Just like, what's your take on this? I know it's, obviously this stuff is a bit further out, but in terms of, it's a good question to ask, because when it comes to individuals, we are talking about individuals here. So when we were talking about Bitcoin, yes, El Salvador as a nation has adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, but it affects every single individual. So what's your take on this one?
I'm going to circle back to one question that you asked first, and then I'll give you my opinion on that. I think it was something along of El Salvador is not the biggest nation spearheading this, and that their volume is relative. I think you were saying something like that. Respective to El Salvador, it's the amount of the amount of transactions that they're bringing into the Bitcoin network isn't as important as the precedent that's being set in this movement.
They're like a one hedge fund or something, like size wise, maybe a little bit bigger, but
maybe. I mean, but it is a country, so I'm starting to I see this as at the macro. I'm starting to see this from going from the microscopic, and this is the writing on the wall going to the macroscopic. It's right there in front of us. So it's really important what that symbolizes. Bitcoin isn't just about being adopted as money. It's also a political movement. Because of the immutability and the transparency. Having governments actually start being held accountable for spending and have it being visible to anyone. I think accountability is something that is completely lacking in every society across the world. Nobody likes to, nobody likes to admit that they did something wrong. But the problem is nowadays, most people just don't. I mean, I'm a bit of a cynic, possibly, but that's an arguable point. This is what crypto was created for: to stamp out corruption and to champion transparency, put the world in a better place. This goes all back to the unsung cypherpunk heroes of the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, right? So I don't know. When you're talking about transparency and the corruption, maybe that's what our esteemed economic leaders meant in the 2000s when they said trickle down economics, with El Salvador at the top. Maybe they were talking about countries and not currency. All right, monetary jokes aside, you asked about QRL. Okay, so a lot of our viewers are already familiar with the project. Our project is a industrial grade hash based signature. I'll keep it short. Keep it shorter than the intro. Provably quantum secure cryptocurrency that was purpose built from the ground up. So we do not, in order to be provably quantum computer secure, we don't have to fork. We're already there, and we're one of the very, very few and and the only one, to my knowledge, that is NIST recommended via the XMSS protocol, which was recently ratified, I think like a year ago, as a recommendation. So barring any black swan event, I guess, or force majeure, you know what? No matter when it happens, Y2Q will always probably be called the black. It could happen 5 to 10 years from now. Writings on the wall for the past 4 years. Companies are saying what's going to happen, and then everyone will say, well, force majeure. It's act of God or black swan. Nobody could have predicted it, right? There's the value that we bring either to the citizen or to the institution or to things larger such as central governments is just being able to say that your digital holdings are quantum secure. Even if you don't believe in that quantum computers will be able to scale, they won't be able to solve the systemic noise problems, that they're impossible. Even if you know that, I think that there's value, especially from a national security standpoint, to say, hey, and I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I love all types. I do love all types of crypto. My portfolio is diverse. But being able to say that, and just in case, we are also quantum secure, and it's kind of like buying a car. If you look at the little things on the car, like this door handle is just engineered perfectly. That kind of tells you subconsciously that they've already fixed and fine-tuned everything else. Now they're just focusing on what are perceived to be the small potatoes. But I just to prefix part of that, I am obviously a blockchain and quantum computer enthusiast. I think that those are the future. So, but at the end of the day, it's up for each person, each organization, each country to make up their mind. The only thing I don't want is just don't come crying to me after the fact. I'll just point you to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, and we're also just we're presenting a broad set of views on different things, and based on what we're discussing, definitely form your own opinions based on your situation, your perspective, your unique take on it. And also, if I would, Michael, if I were to ask you right now, we're in 2021 as we're filming this. If I were to ask you 10 years ago, do you think people would think it's crazy that countries could be adopting Bitcoin as legal tender in 5 or 10 years? So if you think about
put me in the loony bin.
Yes. So
I was in crypto 10 years ago. I was in it, and I had studied monetary policy, and it was still crazy. I remember Max Kaiser saying like 9 years ago, "Could Bitcoin on the radio? I'm driving down. Could Bitcoin go to $100,000? Yes, it could." And I'm like, Max, I love you, but you're nuts, boy.
Yeah, and
here we are. Now I'm betting on it.
Yeah, and the other part then with that is, okay, now we're sitting where we are today, and if we pose other questions tied to, the last question that I asked about, whether it's quantum insurance policy or whether it's where stuff moves forward with security, it might sound crazy in the moment, but 5 to 10 years from now, it's not the same. So I just want to leave with that. I think that kind of is a good way to wrap up and close. I really enjoyed this discussion on Bitcoin and just countries. This whole idea and concept of countries adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. I'm curious to see, once there's 3 or 4 of them, do people do it in different ways? I feel like it's just going to be exciting to see how it all plays out. And there's going to be a lot to come, because there's going to be a lot of friction. Just like if you relate it to an analogy of when tech started getting really big, media, there was a big divide there. That's one thing. But like when it comes to governments clashing, money and state, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Michael, I appreciate you having this conversation and just talking all things, whether it's the monetary policy aspects of it, but more in terms of related to crypto, blockchain, and quantum. I appreciate the conversation. And for those of you watching this, if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to our channel by hitting that pretty red button in the bottom right. That way, when Michael and myself come out with new videos each episode, you're the first to be aware of that, VIP. in our channel, and let us know your take. What do you think, watching this right now, what do you think happens? What countries do you think adopt Bitcoin next? Do you think that the idea is kind of crazy and there's, some scenarios where you think it could be bad, or do you think that there's a lot of positives such as inclusion, talent coming to certain countries? What is your take? Let us know in the comments below or in our active QRL Discord. And Michael, any more closing thoughts on your end?
Yeah, let's go one step further. You know what? Based on all the content we've done, we've been doing this for a couple of years now, at least as far as YouTube videos. We'd like to take this conversation out to other parties. If you want to, if you'd like to come on and you're aligned, or you want to play devil's advocate and you just want to have a conversation, come into our Discord, or go to www.qrl.org, or send us a message at info@theqrl.org. We are now considering bringing other people in to have a roundtable discussion about this. I don't want my word to be it's not, but I don't want it to even seem like it's the only word, because that's just my opinion. So, but otherwise, I thought this was a great conversation, Ryan.
Yeah, and I think too, also, like, let's say if you're watching this, you're like, I'm not obviously the person for video, but if you know someone that is maybe notable in a kind of a complimentary or kitty corner type of space, whether it be related to this, maybe a bit more geared towards what governments are doing with crypto and blockchain, or in a couple episodes ago, maybe someone's an artist is into blockchain or other projects that could relate or add value to the conversation. So definitely, as Michael said, let us know. And until next episode, make sure that you are keeping those digital assets secure. And Michael and I will see you in the next QRL episode. Take care.